Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Turin here with another Warhammer Total War Online commentary. In this particular battle, I will be piloting the Empire, and I will be facing off against a Dwarvish opponent who has taken the high ground over here. So as far as my army composition goes, I have two great cannons. I feel like these are very, very good against Dwarves. They have 450 range, so immediately they already have more range than any of the Dwarven artillery. If we go over here and actually take a quick look at the Dwarven cannon, it actually only has 420 range, so you can usually inch out a pretty serious advantage with that. You know, even that little distance advantage on the great cannons makes quite a bit of difference in my opinion. So I have two of those. As far as my front line goes, I have a front line of swordsmen. They're shielded, and again, a better option than the spearmen because the dwarves don't necessarily have any really large units. So the swordsmen are definitely a good choice. So again, 4 groups of swordsmen. I have a group of handgunners here, and they do have the armor-piercing missiles, so they are quite good against the dwarves, because again, most of the dwarf units are very heavily armored. In the back line, I have 2 greatswords. These are, I feel, an essential unit in terms of Empire infantry against the dwarves, because they are armor-piercing and they are anti-infantry. So they are going to be pretty good and pretty cost-effective against the dwarves with high armor and high leadership. So they can usually stand in there with elite dwarvish infantry. As far as my leadership goes, I have an Empire Captain with the potions, and I have an Amber Wizard here, Davy Crockett, and then I also have a General of the Empire. So I have the double potion deal here, which really allows you to do a lot of harassment and a lot of diving and fun stuff like that. And then with cavalry, I have a group of standard Demogryph Knights. They are armor-piercing anti-infantry and are very, very effective against the dwarves. So that is a quick rundown of my army. So something I want to point out is one way to really dismantle the dwarves is they're not a mobile faction. So when they're forced to move out from their shell and really press you, it's kind of a tough situation for them, in my opinion. So what I like to do with the Empire is usually open up with a standard build of 2 cannons, and then I get these units with the potions as well as the Amber Wizard, because that allows me to just do some brutal harass. You can usually dive his cannons with your Empire, your General of the Empire, as well as your Empire Captain, and even if they get surrounded, they'll usually dismantle that cannon, and you can use a potion just to get them out. And once you've dismantled your opponent's cannon there, you can simply just leave, and then you have range superiority. They have to march into your cannon and gunfire, and it just, all in all, works out pretty well. So that was just something I wanted to share with you guys before we get into his army composition. So my opponent has Dwarf Warriors here, so just standard, cheap infantry. They're armor and shielded, and they do have charge defense against large foes, which is pretty nice for such a cheap, low-tier infantry unit. So hopefully those will work out well for him against the Demogryph Knights. Then he also has Longbeards here. He has a group of Hammerers here, which will be very, very good against the Greatswords. He has 2 Coilers. He also has 2 groups of cannons himself, some additional Dwarf Warriors, as well as a Runesmith, who does have all of the upgrades, so that will be quite good. He has the Slayer King, which I definitely approve of. And back here, more Dwarf Warriors, and then additional Longbeards, and also a group of Slayers. So bringing that group of Slayers will definitely be helpful in dealing with, my Manticore and potentially the Demogryph Knights if he can get a decent surround on them. So one issue for me is he does, if he decides to move up this hill a little bit and get that high ground, it'll definitely be a little tricky for me to advance on him. But regardless, my strategy this game was more to just kind of pick off his range units with my harass before engaging. So without further ado, let's get started. So I go ahead and just advance with my harass units, with my General of the Empire, and I immediately summon that Manticore, which is going to be very, very strong. So the Manticores are great for dive bombing dwarvish units, and, just all around really, really solid unit that you can get. I mean, just getting a monstrous unit just from some Winds of Magic from this Amber Wizard is just so powerful. It's kind of equivocal to that Cygor summon that the Beastmen often do. So he's just setting up his position on this hill here. He has a pretty good angle on me. In my opinion, I might have moved some units up the hill a little bit, but regardless, it's not a bad position. So my cannons are already starting to shoot these Coilers and are generating some value, and you can see just the fact that I have my units flying over here, he's already repositioning, so that's definitely something that's already nice. Meanwhile, my cannons are just teeing off. And his cannons aren't returning fire because not only is their range a little shorter, but I think he was slightly distracted by these units up here. So I'll be fast forwarding a little bit this game because there's a lot of harass and a lot of dancing around before the serious fighting actually starts. So I'm also bringing up my Demogryph Knights right now. So I'm just kind of getting all my units in position and preparing a dive bomb here. So he overextends his Coilers just a little bit. So I actually land all of my units here. I land the Manticore, the General of the Empire, and I also use the Flock of Doom, I believe is what it's called, which is pretty good. It does a little bit of damage to all these units, and I really just wanted to get rid of all of his ranged units with my harass, or really seriously soften them up before I send in my main troop line so I could have range superiority. So I immediately pull my troops out, and as you can see, when you have these flying, monsters type mounted units, it's very easy to escape. even if they get us around, if you just spam the pathing away from them, they can usually push through. Although these Slayers, you guys can see, are doing a pretty good job at keeping up with this General of the Empire. But regardless, I wasn't stressing out because I had potions and, could last almost all day. So right now, you can see that little harass did a lot of damage to those Corlers. Plus, he's still taking cannon fire. And these guys are just flying around. I also have my Demogryph Knights hiding it in the forest over here. And, it's kind of an out of sight, out of mind thing. He's so fixated on this group that I don't think he saw these Demogryph Knights coming up on the flank. Although these Slayers would indicate otherwise. So we will see. So he's finally getting some Corler fire on my elite units here. But regardless, it's not really doing much. They took such heavy losses in that initial dive, as well as his cannon fire, that it's definitely going to be a tough situation for them. His cannons are, I believe they're actually firing at my flying units here. Or they may be firing at my main group. Yeah, it looks like they are. But unfortunately for him, his cannon fire is getting caught up in these trees, and it's just not an ideal angle. Whereas my cannons have a little bit of a better alignment. If you can see, this one is hitting the trees a little bit. I should have moved it over here, but this one is getting a clean shot right at those guys. So right now, I was just mainly positioning my Demogryph Knights in the back, and I was getting ready to come in with another harass. So I wanted to dive bomb him and then time it with these Demogryph Knights so he would have trouble defending against both of those. So again, this is kind of the overarching strategy I was sharing with you guys. You really just want to destroy his range units through harass, and then force the Dwarfs to move out of their shell, and then at that point, his slower units like these cannons are going to be left vulnerable, and all types of stuff like that. So I decided to dive bomb them again, and he was relatively ready for it. He had his Slayers here in the wings, and he also uses a Rune of Negation, which will lower the damage that his units take. But regardless, they're still taking pretty serious damage. But, he reacted very well, and I saw Ungrim, so I decided to just run out of here and, before any damage was done. But regardless, you guys can see the Flock of Doom in conjunction with the dive and the cannon fire is really just destroying his units. And then my Demogryph Knights also came in here in the back line and are going to start really tearing into these cannons. Unfortunately, the pathing was a little weird. I think what happened is the Demogryph Knights knocked a few of the Cannoneers, and this unit of Demogryph Knights pathed after a group here. So unfortunately, the way they got spread out was really, really bad because he was able to get us around here and is going to kill a lot of Demogryph Knights. That was bad. But at that same time, I take advantage of all his troops running back here, and I dive bomb with my elite units. And, I use another Flock of Doom, which was so good because everything was really, tightened up. So that's another thing. If you can dive in, lure all his units into a clump, and then use AoE abilities like that, I mean, it's just chipping away at everything. And you can see his army has taken serious losses. He's taken around 184 losses, and, I've only lost, a few units to his siege fire. So at that point, I advanced my main army, and he was so kind of distracted with what was going on up here that my handgunners are able to just get in position and begin to tee off on these Longbeards, which is going to be great because they have armor-piercing capabilities and other things like this. And, of course, all my units, with the exception of this Pharaoh Manticore, didn't really take much damage in that harass. So, unfortunately, my Demogryph Knights got kind of surrounded there. Definitely well played on my opponent's part. But regardless, you can see how much that harass has done. Just constantly dive bombing, going after his range units, and then forcing him to march out. Because you can see his formation, it's a little clunky at this point, and a little frazzled. And, this swordsman line, as well as the long swords and these handgunners, are just getting great positioning. Because, again, most of his Quarrelers and other ranged units got taken out by the dive bombing of my leadership. So he doesn't really have much to answer these handgunners with. And they're just getting free range here, which is definitely rough. So as far as the front line goes, he's engaging across the front. And, you just want to isolate groups that look a little out of position. That's the problem with not advancing with a solid formation, is you leave groups isolated like this. And, now my leadership is going to be able to dive in here and really do some damage. And also this Manticore, I send him back here to just, deal with these Quarrelers, and he is definitely going to have some fun chasing these guys down. So it's going pretty well for me, although my opponent does get a nice little surround with his auxiliary units, and he will probably be able to take out this Manticore no problem. So that wasn't too bad. One of his cannons is offline also from the harass, which was pretty good. And as you can see, these handgunners are just teeing off on these Slayers, which is so ideal. The Slayers have no armor, so if you can get any sort of ranged harass on them, it's going to work out really well for you. At the same time, the Demogryph Knights who came back from rout are going to clean up these cannons, and that's what's great about Demogryph Knights. They have pretty high leadership and are very resilient units, so even if they do get driven off at first, even 5 Demogryph Knights can make a huge difference. Unfortunately, he is getting my Manticore, but regardless, that's just simply a summoned unit. That's just like 16 winds of magic there, and his whole army is chasing it. And at the same time, it clumped him up, made him subject to another Flock of Doom, and also it left his front line a little weakened. And really, it's just mostly Dwarf Warriors and, just Dwarf Warriors, literally, against Great Swords and Swordsmen, as well as my leadership. Although Ungrim isn't here, so Ungrim is probably the only reason that this battle isn't going awful for him. And Ungrim is definitely doing a pretty solid job in there. And my handgunners are still completely operational. This group was just getting free firing here. And look at that. Even after that big investment of chasing down the Manticore, you know, it still didn't pay off. This Manticore is just going to come back in here and take out these poor Cannoneers who are getting no rest. So the one thing my opponent has going for him is he did take out my Demogryph Knights. And he still does have Ungrim in here, who's in really good health. He has a Runesmith who's starting to take a little bit of damage, but he does have a pretty powerful little force here. So unfortunately for him, they are taking a lot of handgunner fire, and the handgunner fire is very, very devastating, especially against hammerers, because hammerers do have pretty good armor, but they're you know, not as sturdy as the shielded units against the missile fire, so it will be pretty cost effective against them. As you can see, they're starting to take some good damage, but that Runesmith with the Rune of Negation is keeping them afloat. And I did move this handgunner group over here to start shooting into the side of this flank, because he was very fixated on taking out this group here. He probably should have pulled a group to deal with these handgunners, or at least chase them around. And as you guys can see, my cannons are still online. They've just been generating great value this entire game. And this group Manticore, as well as the remnants of the Demogryph Knights, were able to come clean up these Cannoneers back here. But it's crazy. Even the Dwarvish Cannoneers are pretty tough. I mean, they've been jumped like 6 or 7 times, and they were still in there fighting and, you know, keeping those cannons online as long as they could. But this firing from the side over here is going to be really tough. And, you know, eventually these dwarves are, you know, going to have to throw in the towel, and they can't really take that. So over here, this particular battle is going well for my opponent. Actually, these dwarves probably, you know, are winning this battle, I would say. You know, they still have higher numbers, and these swordsmen are starting to crumble. I think that's where Ungrim was for quite some time, so that probably explains it. And it looks like Ungrim had moved to the far eastern flank up here and is now getting into these great swords, which is where you want him. He's going to do very good against great swords and, you know, generate a lot of value. So, but regardless, most of the dwarvish units in this group have kind of been worn down. And my general, as well as my Empire captain and my other troops have all come to join now. So it's only a matter of time, really, before the dwarvish forces are driven off. Again, I think he took too much damage in that initial harass. And if he had like 2 groups of quarrelers left to return fire on these handgunners, I think he might have had a pretty good chance. But regardless, you know, letting my handgunners run free and get ideal positioning worked out pretty well for me. So we'll go ahead and fast forward here, as I think the remainder of this battle is mostly just Ungrim battling like 15, 20, 30 units all by himself over here. So definitely a rough situation there. But I just wanted to share that game with you guys to just show you what I think is a very effective Empire strategy against the Dwarves. You know, if you get Davy Crockett as well as these guys with potions and the Manticore, no matter what the Dwarves do, I think he could have certainly defended it and had his troops, you know, in a better supporting position for those quarrelers. But a lot of people don't expect you to dive bomb them that aggressively. And it is so cost effective, because then your cannons can just free range shoot the entire game, and you can even look at the cannon comparison and see the value there. So most of the troops did quite well. The swordsmen held the line, did their due, and, you know, dealt with Ungrim for quite a long time. Greatswords did well, but these handgunners did so good because, again, he didn't have the range support to deal with them. So getting that range superiority through harass is quite effective. So really good game to Casso. Look forward to seeing you again on ladder. And thanks for watching, guys. Appreciate the support. And please like and subscribe. And I'll keep putting out content as often as I can. Have an excellent night, guys. Take care.